Another star wide receiver in the NFL getting his first extension. Big money for Terry McLaurin from the Washington Commanders. We'll get into that, how it affects both the Washington roster and maybe the wide receiver landscape in the NFL. And Twitter Thursday, your Twitter questions. There's some questions about some teams that might implode and a question about a future Peacock and Williamson Fantasy Football League. We'll be running that one again this year. Tons of other questions as well about the National Football League, all coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks for checking in with us. If you do not know who we are, I am Brian Peacock, NFL analyst, also the host of Locked On at 49ers here on the network. I've been a fantasy football writer, radio producer, on-air radio guy, many years. That's where I come from in this thing. You know Matt Williamson. You got to know Matt Williamson, former NFL scout, ESPN, Pro Football Network. You've read his work. He is a podcast godfather at the old
four-letter network. Yeah.
When was your first podcast again?
Football Today. I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I think this is my 25th season doing this for a living. I'm pretty sure. And some of those, the first four and a half were with teams. You know, I was with Pitt for 3 years, Akron for the better part of a year, and then a season with the Browns, and we were all let go. But since then, it's like 20 years in the media and basically involved in podcasts every step of the way before people even knew what podcasts were. I mean, one of my favorite stories, good buddy Ross Tucker, they approached him after we had some turnover with the Football Today podcast, and this is probably, 15 years ago. Hey, Ross, do you want to do a podcast with Matt Williamson? And his answer, and he'll tell you this to this day, I really respect Matt's work. Yeah, I'd love to work with Matt, but what's a podcast? Now he's got like this conglomerate Ross Tucker football podcast. Yeah, right.
Now he's a podcast monster. That's hilarious. I love how these jobs and careers intertwine, and I love the story about how Daniel Jeremiah took your office.
I like to think so. He moved in when I moved out. Yeah,
he got hired as part of the staff after you got fired there in Cleveland. Pretty interesting. A lot of staffs got fired in Cleveland, Matt. So you can't be mad about that one.
No shame in it whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Let's talk Terry McLaurin here, who has been newly re-upped by the Washington Commanders. We're talking about a 3-year extension, $70 million overall contract, $28 million of that in the signing bonus, $53 million guaranteed. And according to the numbers I saw from Adam Schefter, that's over 75% of that contract guaranteed, 76.4% of it guaranteed or something like that. So it works out to about a $23.3 million annual contract for Terry McLaurin. That'll take him through the 2025 season. So that extension kicks in 2023, 24, and 25 for Terry McLaurin, who will turn 30 in 2025. Most of the other deals are a little bit lengthier, Matt. Do you think this is about McLaurin betting on himself to get to that next contract before he's 31, 32 years old?
Yeah, maybe. I hadn't thought about it from that angle, but you might be 100% right there. There's a big group of these guys that by NFL standards haven't made a ton of money yet from that draft class, amazing wide receiver class, and a lot of them are day 2 picks. And he's in line. I think he's phenomenal. I mean, him and DJ Moore to me are well-known, well-respected, high draft picks, but I don't know that the general fan realizes how good they are. I mean, if they were Chiefs or Packers or whoever, I think they would be second-round fantasy picks, not fourth rounds. You know what I mean? I think McLaurin's a true number one, and I don't throw that term around loosely at all. He's a deep threat. He attacks all levels. And I remember him coming out of Ohio State. One of his claims to fame then was he was an elite special teams player. Well, Washington's saying, well, you're done with that. But it just shows some of his background and toughness and competitiveness, you know?
He was one of the oddest prospects because he was good. And for some reason at Ohio State, the quarterbacks were getting drafted high and the wide receivers getting overlooked a little bit, even though they were so talented. And, you know, the target percentage wasn't high for him. but you saw the speed, tough player. He was a big-time special teams guy, and he falls as far as he did in the draft. And it was just an absolute steal because, he can play ball too. And we've seen it with Ohio State wide receivers now who have been better pros than college players. And it's been kind of the opposite for the Ohio State quarterbacks. And so we'll see if Justin Fields and the next year there's CJ Stroud can sort of buck that trend for Ohio State. But by the way, you mentioned DJ Moore. He might be the best deal as far as wide receivers go out there, because I agree with you. One of the more underrated receivers in the NFL, and he got signed to his extension, a year earlier before some of these guys in the following draft, before the wide receiver money kind of exploded this offseason.
Yeah, I bet he's second guessing things a little bit right now. Yeah.
We should have bet on myself one more year. And he's so good. But yeah, a little bit of anonymity with Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore and some really talented players because they haven't had as many playoff games and, as much flash maybe and are not as well known as the Deebos and the AJ Browns and the DK Metcalfs of the world.
Yeah, 100%. I think Washington has a pretty solid offense now. I mean, Wentz aside, we've talked a lot of Wentz, and I think he gets a little bit of a bum rap for how things went down, and I'm not there with his leadership and whatnot, but I do think he's better than what they've played with pretty much through the McLaurin era. I think that's a pretty solid O-line. Logan Thomas is a middle-of-the-road tight end, getting up there in age, but, I mean, he's fine. The stable of backs now, however they decide to deploy them, could be, a good group, a potent group. I mean, it's depth there as well. But I like the pass catchers. I mean, the receivers, if you go, I think Samuel what's his face, Samuel, the other Ohio State kid that's there.
Curtis
Samuel is a much better player than he's just kind of out of sight, out of mind, but he can be a real weapon. I know Denami Brown didn't light the world on fire or Gandy Golden, but those guys are still in the mix as like 4s and 5s. And then Dotson, I think, is a really good addition too. So I think they have a really strong stable of pass catchers.
Yeah, McLaurin, Dotson, Curtis Samuel, you can really see how the styles and what they're best at fit in. And Curtis Samuel can be a little bit more of the gadgety guy. Then you got Diami Brown, the third rounder from the year before, who I really liked, who's more of an outside downfield guy that you can filter in. So you've got a lot of different style, not a lot of size, but a lot of different styles there, and definitely a lot of athleticism and speed with that group. So it all comes down to the quarterback on offense. And if the offensive line can hold up and protect Carson Wentz, keep him healthy, and obviously run the football, the offense took a big step forward on paper this year, and the defense should be just better by running it back and trying again, right?
Right.
And what we saw last year and expecting more out of the Washington defense. So a real wild card team in the NFC East is the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, I mean, culturally, ownership, I mean, they're hard to trust, and it's hard to get around those things. I mean, you don't just build winners overnight, but I like their roster more than I have in recent years.
I asked this question on Locked On 49ers, and I want to ask you the same question, Matt, because Deebo Samuel obviously has had that contract dispute with the 49ers, and he should be getting paid hopefully in the next couple of weeks here before training camp. And I think, seeing an A.J. Brown contract, seeing a Terry McLaurin contract just helps, both sides figure out where the money should be. So for Terry McLaurin, $23.3 million. I'm guessing Deebo Samuel is going to be asking for more than that. Both of McLaurin and Deebo were a little bit older prospects coming out. So both of them are going to be in that, later 20s range, whereas DK Metcalf's still 24 years old and AJ Brown's still on the younger side of things as well. AJ Brown got 25 per year, but there's that bloated final year of the contract, which mucks things up a little bit there with the numbers. So if you had to rank those receivers from that 2019 draft, who do you think is going to end up getting paid the most? We kind of know that now AJ Brown getting a little bit more than Terry McLaurin, even though basically Terry McLaurin's contract is similar for the first 3 years, but he doesn't have the bloated fourth year to make that go up to $25 million per year.
I like that. I like that question because I was going to approach you as something similar. Let's do this. There's 3 of them out there still looking for contracts. Diontae, DK, Deebo, and McLaurin just signed. If I were to rank them in value, I think Deontay's clearly 4. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, I think that one's pretty easy. Good player. I would still pay him, but he'd be less than these guys by 10%, 20%, whatever the heck it is.
Deontay's going to be the hardest contract because he's going to want something similar, and I don't know if I'd pay that. So that one might be tough. He has to get that in free agency and play it all the way out.
He may get franchised and then be sent on his way or traded if things go wrong or who knows, especially if they keep developing guys. So I think his is a little stickier. Deebo versus DK versus McLaurin to me is really hard. I mean, they honestly, all three would be on the exact same tier. I think, and I'm going to dance around the question a little bit. Deebo's the most valuable for the Niners. If Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson was my quarterback, DK would be the most valuable. I mean, because of the deep ball prowess and, the running skills and opens things up for that deep ball. Pure football player. Like if I knew everything I knew about those three, they're coming out of college. Matt, write a scouting report, put a grade on them. I think I put McLaurin first.
Oh, really?
Barely. He's the least freakiest, but he has the least holes.
And you're not including AJ Brown in this?
I didn't. No.
Okay.
AJ Brown would be first for me.
He'd be number one. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the 49ers are probably arguing that Deebo should be in between McLaurin and AJ Brown. Plus, there's that funny money year.
The
49ers, like, unlike a lot of teams, don't live in that dead money zone. They don't like, they've had the fewest, I think the least amount of dead money in the league over the last 10 years or so. That's just the way, that's the way they do business. So I think they would rather do something closer to the Terry McLaurin contract and leave out that extra bloated year than do something where they know they're going to have dead money and have to cut him after 3 years. And then that leaves you the opportunity to re-sign the guy instead of having to like restructure or whatever else happens at the end of a contract, because AJ Brown's not going to see the $38 million year probably in year 4 of his contract. Tyreek Hill's not going to see the $40 million year 4 or 5, whatever it is, of his contract. So the numbers aren't really the numbers. So the contracts are really similar. So I think 23.3 is closer to it. But I think Deebo will get more than Terry McLaurin. They're probably arguing about guarantees, and I think DK is going to sign last and get the most out of all of them. That's the way I think it'll go. It's tough though, because Deebo had the best single season last year of all these guys, but the rest of them have been more consistent. Terry McLaurin
had the best career.
Yeah, McLaurin was almost 1,000-yard guy as a rookie, 919 yards, then was 1,100, and then 1,000 again. So just remarkably consistent his 3 years in the league. DK similar. DK had a bunch of touchdown catches on top of it. AJ Brown, some injuries obviously, but more consistent as well. And Deebo kind of sputtered at the beginning, banged up a little bit, and then had the monster year. So it's kind of tough to rank those guys. And in the end, they probably should be like all right exactly in the same tier, just with a little bit different skill sets.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you're them, again, Diontae kind of decide, I want to be the one that signs last. If you can give me a smidge more than the guy in front of me and I take a smidge more than him, there's some pecking order to that. That's more of a quarterback thing, but I still think it's relevant. I'm sure you've given this more thought than I have with Deebo, but he reminds me a little bit of the Lamar contract where, I know that wide receivers don't get 8-year deals, but I don't know that he'll be the same at the end of the contract that he'll be at the beginning of the contract, because he relies so much on his physical gifts.
Yes, absolutely. And he wants fewer carries to keep him healthier so he can get to that next contract, which is, makes a lot of sense. But maybe if the 49ers can up the guarantees, that makes him feel better. And if he's got guaranteed dollars, then they don't have to worry. That fixes the problem. They don't have to worry about how he's used because he's got the guarantees in his contract. So that's probably some of the bargaining issues going on there. DK is just the freakiest. And I think
I know. I was going to bring him up again too.
No,
One quick DK question for you.
Okay.
If you were Seattle and Green Bay, Indy, or Baltimore called you, good teams, and said, you can have our next 2 first-round picks for DK, would you say yes? Because you got to pay them, and you're not good.
Yeah, with the way the roster looks right now for the Seahawks, I'd probably trade him.
Yeah, I think I would too.
Take those picks, but I don't think they're going to do that. I think they think they're going to contend. And I wonder if DK Metcalf, if you're DK, I don't know if you'd want to sign right now with the Seahawks. You might want to play this out a little bit, because you
deadline might come around and they have 1 win or 2 wins.
Yeah, if you sign and it's a disaster season, is that what you want to lock yourself into? And then you're not tradable because your contract and your signing bonuses and the dead money, they couldn't possibly trade you after you signed your contract for the first couple of years. So maybe you want to see this thing through 1 more year, play it out, and then maybe you get even more money later if you bet on yourself.
Chances are, even including draft picks next year, no matter where DK would go, would probably be an upgraded quarterback.
Yes, it's looking that way depending on what happens here. If maybe I think Baker Mayfield will be a nice fit with DK Metcalf.
I do too.
That happens. That he's got a good deep ball, enjoys throwing it deep. Give him some shots, but I think you're right. So DK, maybe play that one out a little bit, and then the money will be there as long as he doesn't have some huge injury, which is obviously a big part of it for all these guys. But he's so young; he can sign a 4-year deal, still be before 30 before he signs his next one.
Right, good point. And he's gigantic. Oh, by the way,
he might not age great either. A little bit of a stiff athlete, flexibility could wane for him. And if he doesn't have that top speed, maybe, because he doesn't quite have the looseness of other bigger bodied wide receivers. He's not like T.O. as far as like a little bit of looseness in his body. David Boston, could he have that sort of end of his career? Remember, David Boston was David Boston was a different dude, like PEDs or something going on there. 240 pounds all of a sudden.
He was a bodybuilder.
Yeah, what the heck?
They played football on the side, yeah.
Yeah, probably body-wise, that's the closest comp we've seen for DK. And, a little bit more stiffness there, and his career ended pretty abruptly.
The reason I didn't mention him with Deebo in terms of, potentially falling off a cliff, because he has rare gifts as well, is I was thinking of Marshall,
Brandon
Marshall. He's also bigger than people thought. He was like 230, 6'4", 6'5", and at the end he couldn't run, but he won on body positioning. And Metcalf's not great at that yet, but if he can develop into a rebounder, I think he could play a really long time.
Yeah, he's good at it because of his size, but he's not great at it as far as like just footwork and being that basketball player.
Right.
All right, we got to move along here. Let's get into some of the Twitter Tuesday questions. Which team in the NFL might implode this year? We might have talked about one of them already. Let's get to that next, but I want to let the folks out there first know about Rock Auto. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Don't spend that 50% markup, 100% markup, paying twice as much as you should be for auto parts from a chain store or the car dealership. There's so many things and I've learned this with rockauto.com, and parts that I would never have ever attempted to fix on my vehicle, and it ended up being super easy, and I saved hundreds of dollars. Talking about a $40 part versus taking your car into the dealership, paying more for the same part and the labor on top of it, and they might not even have it in stock because your car's not working for a week or whatever it is. Ordered it Rock Auto, shipped it to me quick, slapped that thing on there, good to go. I mean, it was amazing how I was able to do this, and it's kind of surprised myself. And Rock Auto has been doing this for 20 years, family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 2 decades now. Rock Auto prices are always reliably low for every customer, professionals and do-it-yourselfers alike. Every kind of part you could ask for, big parts, small parts. For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, $350+ from a chain store, only $216 from rockauto.com. So go explore their easy-to-use website, find solutions for your auto part needs, an amazing selection at rockauto.com. Go there right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you're checking out all the rest that the network has to offer, including the Locked On NFL podcast, and the Peacock and Williamson's YouTube feed is on the Locked On NFL channel. So make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On NFL channel to get Peacock and Williamson and a ton of other great content here on the network. And your team is covered, by the way, no matter the sport, on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Matt. Marine Mom asks, are you guys doing a fantasy football league this year? We had a listener league. Was it last year or the year before? Or have we done it 2 years straight now?
Just one. I think there's just one, but we did definitely had it last year. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think we should.
I wasn't happy with how I performed in that league. Well, I mean, I need to have a better showing.
Just a poor performance from Team Williamson. That was bad. That was. I think we have to do another league just so you can show the listeners that you know what you're talking about when it comes to fantasy football.
Right. Maybe they should. Yeah. They're going to start tuning out those episodes if they see that effort again. Yeah, I'm more than up for it. We need to figure out the parameters. Who gets in? Is it the same group as last year? I mean, there's a lot of people got left out. I mean, I think the champ has to come back.
Yeah.
I don't think you or I is going to be the commissioner.
Yeah, first I'll be the commissioner. Okay. First invite goes to the champ, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the listeners there. So.
Okay. And maybe we should make it fun and be like, write us 4 sentences why you deserve to get in. And here's my PayPal account.
Yeah. We need some phone numbers. We need to call some people and verify, some I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
I like it.
How
I
about
like
this
this question about implosions, by the way.
Oh yeah, it's I mean, a couple of listeners going negative. One and kind of the same question from two different listeners. One says, Jason said, which team is getting more off-season love than they deserve? And Gerard just flat out says, what team has the best chance of a colossal implode?
Okay, so I've been giving this a little thought because I thought we'd have a little talk about this, and I'm avoiding the Bears and the Texans and teams that have not been good or not expected to be good.
It's not an implosion if you don't expect them to be good in the first.
Right. I mean, if Seattle wins 4 games, that's not an implosion. And I'll tend to avoid teams with stable, good quarterbacks and highly respected winning head coaches. But I'm going to go against that rule a little bit because a couple names of teams I came up with goes against that. And I came up with 4 names. Tennessee. What if Derrick Henry gets old? What if Tannehill is old? And I don't know that their line's great. Are we counting on Woods and Burks right out of the gate? I mean, in terms of injuries. So that's one.
That's a good one. I mean, they were the 1 seed in the AFC last year. So,
right.
Yeah.
Nowhere to go but down.
And there, I could see that. I didn't think of that team right off the top of my head, but that's a fantastic pick.
Okay. Dallas. And my hesitation there is I think Dak is really, really good and better than we thought last year. I don't really trust McCarthy, though, and I think their roster's worse now than it was then.
So you're telling me in the offseason next year, the storyline will be Dallas Cowboys sending draft picks to the Saints for the rights to Sean Payton?
Yes. Okay. I'm predicting that no matter if they will go 17-0 win the Super Bowl. I think Jerry's already got that figured out.
Okay.
This one, again, is blasphemy because I think they have a good quarterback and the best coach. I think the Patriots roster stinks. I mean, and by implode, I don't mean that with the first pick in the draft, New England takes Will Anderson out of Bama. I mean, maybe picking in the top 10, picking 8th or something. You know what I mean?
It's hard to pick the Patriots as a team that can completely fall off because even with not great rosters, Bill Belichick has proven that he can keep the team afloat. So I would be shocked if they're very far under 500 or really under 500 at all. But I think their competition has gotten better.
Right, like the Dolphins.
And their roster is just not good.
So, right.
I mean, it's coach of the year type stuff just to have a 10-win season, right, for the Patriots. I mean, that
absolutely.
It's unbelievable if they're able to do that. But I think that's what's going to be a 9-win team, But if they're winning like 5, 6, 7 games, yeah, maybe it'll start to be the beginning of the end for Bill Belichick there. And maybe it should be the beginning of the end for Bill Belichick, the GM, anyway.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I thought it was coach of the year stuff to get that team to the playoffs. I mean, they were one of the worst playoff teams. Right. Or the year before when the whole team opted out, they went 7-9 and Brady left. I mean, that's coach of the year stuff, It
was amazing, right?
It's amazing.
If that season, the first without Brady, and now they've got a second-year quarterback, and so I think they're potentially better now than they were that season, and they were only they only got down to 9 losses. So,
right. I mean, they don't have a low floor, but we might look at this team and be like, maybe it's time for change.
A bounce here or there because they're winning, even when they're winning 7 games that year, they're winning close games. So a bounce here or there, Belichick starts to show his age a little bit, at all, some cracks somewhere. Mac Jones gets hurt or something, it could implode. That's not a bad one at all.
I'm sure there's some listeners going, well, if you're going to go down that road, Williamson, you should at least mention the Steelers.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair. Their quarterback could be a disaster. Their O-line could be a disaster. Key injury or two, but I don't think their floor is low.
I think the 49ers and the Steelers are in the exact same boat because there's potential at quarterback, young quarterback. How good is that young quarterback? We don't know. That could go a lot of directions, but the rest of the team you would think is a contending roster. So that should keep a young quarterback afloat, both well-coached teams.
Right.
But you could see where, okay, we have Super Bowl aspirations, but we have a quarterback who's, combined, if you're talking about Kenny Pickett and Trey Lance, if Pickett ends up starting games for the Steelers and winning that job, you're talking about combined 2 NFL starts. Right. Between the 2 quarterbacks.
Played in 2 years.
So, you can have Super Bowl aspirations, but not many quarterbacks who have started 2 games or less in the NFL have gone a long way.
If I had to pick one implosion team, though, and this is sort of low-hanging fruit, I think it's the Browns.
Got to be the Browns. That was the first team that jumped out. Yeah, because they have just the cloud over the organization right now. It's just bad vibes.
Even if it's a 6-game suspension, it could be a disaster season.
Yeah. But I think they're similar to where the 49ers and the Steelers are, where the roster is pretty good, aside from just, who knows what's going to happen at quarterback. No idea. Mm-hmm. And then bad mojo on top of it for the Browns.
I mean, I've had questions from Browns fans along the lines of, I refuse to root for this team anymore because I don't condone their way of doing business. What should I do?
We talked about this with the at the beginning of the week with the worst trade in NFL history. Talk about the Herschel Walker stuff. Vikings fans, when they traded for Herschel Walker, weren't like, well, I'm never rooting for this team again.
I thought they were winning the Super Bowl.
Even though it was a bad trade, at least that didn't happen. They still had their fan base. The Browns are losing fans. And it's just a disaster over there. And it's got to seep into the vibe of the locker room, too. And I'm sure it's weighing on front office staff and coaching staff. And even when you saw that press conference where it's Barry on one side, Stefanski on the other side, Deshaun Watson in the middle, their face, just looking at their faces, especially Stefanski, is like they kind of felt uncomfortable about the whole situation. So I don't think they were even sure about it themselves. It might have been more of an ownership-driven move the more I think about it.
And I think Stefanski's a good X's and O's guy. He was coach of the year 2 years ago, and he would have got my vote that year. But he's not Belichick or Tomlin or Shanahan. Can he paddle the ship through that storm? I don't know. Last year it wasn't a ring endorsement.
Right. And who knows, maybe at some point in the future, we'll talk about him in those terms. But right now, there's no track record to believe that he's going to be in that tier of coach. Right. Okay. We've got to move along. More questions here. Good question about the London game. Jags and Broncos at Wembley Stadium coming up this year. But I want to let the folks know first about BetOnline. You can bet on tons of future NFL action at betonline.net, your number one source for betting needs and sports information. And I was looking at some recent over-unders and some of the latest lines here from BetOnline. And they've got week 1, week 2 spreads already up. Like we can start making, they don't have every game from what I can see, but there's a lot of games. Like we can go through and make picks versus the spread already for the week 1 schedule. It's crazy. The only weeks that there's no lines yet is week 17 and 18. That's how far ahead of the game they are right now. I'll throw this one by you real quick, Matt. Do we have Steelers? We do not have Steelers lines yet in week 1. Okay, never mind.
Okay.
We got a week 2 Steelers. You're talking about an implosion for the New England Patriots. They're visiting Pittsburgh. The Patriots favored by 1.5 at Pittsburgh in week 2. Who you got?
I think I'm taking the Steelers at home on that one.
I'd take 1.5 points with the home team Steelers there week 2. All right.
I think the Steelers are only favored in like 5 games this year right now. It's a very small number.
It's a weird team. It is. I can't get behind the Trubisky Steelers, I got to say. But if you are, you can bet on the Steelers and probably get some pretty good odds for them to win the next Super Bowl. So go to the website, use your mobile device to learn more about all of the trends and action at BetOnline, not just football, Major League Baseball, fights, celebrity boxing, esports, live betting, Vegas casino games at BetOnline, where the game starts. Matt, I want to go to this question about the game at Wembley. This is from Niner Overseas. Let's see where Niner Overseas lives. He's somewhere in England over there. And he says he's taking some buddies and trying to spread the gospel of the NFL across the pond. He says, just booked my tickets for Jags versus Broncos at Wembley, taking 5 friends who don't watch much NFL. Quote, will this be a good game? They asked. What can I tell them without lying?
I hope to get over there sometime for a game like that. I mean, and I know the Steelers are due, and the beat writers will go, and my co-host on my Steelers show has done it, and I've had some fans and friends that have gone over for it. Side note, I mean, we were on the beach last week with my family, and we were talking about if you could go anywhere in the world, where do you want to go? And we pretty much came to consensus Europe. So I'd love to get over there in general. But my aunt went, and some people I know have been there, as I mentioned. And one thing you'll expect is a lot of positivity. Everyone's just happy to be there, and it's not Eagles fans hating Cowboy fans or any of that. And everyone said you'll see every jersey in the stands. You know what I mean? Like, it's just NFL fans. They don't really care about the product as much. This isn't a good game to go to, or, They're just excited to see it. And I think it'd be a blast.
Yeah, I liken it to when because this isn't somebody traveling. This is where they already live, right? And they're going to the game that's coming to them kind of. So for me, it's like when I go to, like when I go to a soccer game or something, or when like the cup, the World Cup is happening or something, and there's some games nearby, and it's a sport I don't follow, but it's this big event and it's fun. And so I'm sure any NFL game will be really cool. I would say school them up on the game if they're not big NFL fans, so they know what they're watching more than anything. And really focus on the quarterbacks. Russell Wilson already a star quarterback in the NFL on his new team. Can he lead those Denver Broncos to the promised land, which is what they hoped when they were trading a bunch to go get Russell Wilson. And then, the up and coming stud generational quote unquote quarterback in Trevor Lawrence and a new coaching staff in Jacksonville. And I know the Jacksonville Jaguars kind of slowly building a little bit of a fan base over there because they've had so many games. And so can you prove that you're a team that can capture an entire country, right? With this star young quarterback with flowing hair, can you be that team that gets people excited? So that's probably the angle I would go to when I was trying to talk my friends into going to that football game.
So my daughter's 13, has zero interest in my profession or football at all. It just so happens her teacher is engaged to a Steeler preferred free agent. So she came home from school the other day. How does this guy make it? At best, he's going to be a practice squad dude, and so I had to explain sort of that to her. And it got me thinking through this lens, like, if I had never seen football, like if I didn't know what cricket was, and I went to my first cricket match, what would strike me? If I had never seen football, if I didn't watch it since I could crawl, what would be my first impressions? You mentioned the quarterbacks. Like, I think I would be amazed how well a human being can throw a ball that size. I know I'd be amazed by how many people are on the field at once and how big and fast and violent they are.
Yeah. Big, fast, violent. A lot happens in a short period of time if you're not an NFL fan. So that's why it's easier to focus on one thing and know what you're looking at before the play starts rather than just watching it go and fall on the ball. You're like, what the heck just happened? And yeah, that's a good one too. Go out and throw the football around with your buddies. Then when you go, and that's usually the most important, because you see it on TV all the time. It doesn't really register. But when you see an NFL caliber arm in person, you're like,
it's unbelievable.
Wow. When you see him throw that deep out, how the hell is that even possible? When you're throwing around this pigskin with your buddies, you can barely chuck it 40 yards in the air, and you see this rope that these guys can throw. It's pretty impressive.
Yes. And to take a step further, and I've said this many times over those 25 years that we opened the show, you don't understand how big and hard an NFL ball is until you get your hands on one or have to catch it. And I'm not going down Deflategate road, but taking a little air out of it sure makes it easier. It definitely does. It doesn't hurt. And my experience was I would go out to practice. I'm the young guy. I'm new. I want to be the first one out there. I'm energetic. I got my button up on and my khakis and, my orange shoes. And Jeff Garcia, who's like the weakest arm quarterback in the league, is looking for someone to warm him up. Hey, dude, catch a few balls with me. Sure, Jeff, I'll help you out. He's throwing 30% maybe. I mean, he's soft tossing, and I thought he was going to knock my teeth out of my face. I'm just defending myself.
Here's a question that's impossible to answer, but I'm going to read it anyway. We got it earlier in the week from Lake Geneva 91. He says, Matt and Brian, who are the top scouts in the NFL? Who should get credit for advising their GMs to draft particularly great players who were underhyped? I would say the first part of that's impossible to know. Like,
it's impossible to know.
It is impossible to know who the good scouts are behind the scenes. And you hear these guys in the GM cycles, right? And it's always like Ryan Poles. I didn't know Ryan Poles was on the GM hot list, right? And all of a sudden it's like, I was getting interviews. I just got hired as GM. But people around the league know these guys, right? And teams aren't trying to lose really good people, so they're not like hyping them up, and there's no scorecard anywhere. Like, it's the most secretive process in the world, the NFL draft. So you never get any information about who's doing what and who's choosing who and who teams even like. So that's like impossible to answer. So I wanted to answer that question just to talk about how little teams are allowing other people to know about what's going on in their building.
Right. They don't have a Twitter account to follow or on social media. Or I just left LSU and gave this guy this grade. And, it's not like Mel and Todd. You can go back and say, here's your misses, here's your wins. I mean, there's nothing verified,
And fans love to go at analysts and say, look at this. You thought this guy was going to be a bust and he was great. It's like,
Right.
oh, you found go look at what actual GMs do, and you'd be appalled at how bad they are as well, because you don't get to see their entire draft board. You just get to see the one player they picked. And
they have a huge advantage over Mel and Todd, where we need a nose tackle, and I have a great nose tackle coach. I'm going to plug this guy in there. I mean, Mel and Todd are like generic, have to keep every 32 teams. They could be right on guys that just landed in the wrong spot.
Oh, the amount of information, background that teams get that we have no idea about that might scare you off a player, or this guy's got the work ethic and you believe in him, that might play up his grade a little bit for you on your draft board, and still they make a ton of mistakes. So it's pretty amazing. But yeah, that's really hard. But the second part of the question, what do you think, Matt? You've been in this situation. You've been in front offices, right? Like you know how a team operates from a certain perspective. And
I know they're remarkably valuable.
And I know every team is different, but like
they are.
Who gets credit for advising their GMs to draft particularly great players who are underhyped? I mean, the area scouts, the later the draft goes, the more important the depth of your front office roster is.
Yes.
Right? So like the area scouts finding the guys they love, and nobody could draft them, but they're this guy that they've been pounding the table for, and you're on the phone with them, and you've got this, you've got this rapport with this prospect that you've scouted for a while in your area, and you're talking to him on the phone as the draft's ending and trying to get him signed as an undrafted free agent. Like that kind of stuff at the end of the draft, day 3 is where the scouts really make their money. And the GMs, a little bit more of the, and the head coaches are more involved with the earlier picks in the NFL draft for the most part. And some GMs lean on their staff. Some GMs are like, okay, I'll take your stuff under advisement, but this is my show. Nobody else is making any draft picks here. This is me.
Exactly. Again, every organization is vastly different. Like it was well known back in my scouting days that the Patriots scouts had no say at all. They just gathered the numbers and the data and the background, give it all to Bill and his 2 or 3 guys, and they sorted through it. They really didn't think, they didn't care about Matt's opinion of how he changes direction or how he runs zone. They'll figure that stuff on their own. Just give me the data. The Steelers are the opposite. I know this one better because they have the same scouts for a million years and they trust them. And the thing I noticed immediately as a new scout was how much I didn't know. And it comes down to relationships. If you bring donuts into Auburn for 40 years in a row and the right people to talk to, even when there's turnover, and the right secretaries and security guards and all that stuff. And I always bring it back to the Steelers, but I've said this 8,000 times since the Steelers drafted Pickett, who played in the same building, not just, every day. It's all about information. Scouting is about information. You're a private detective as much as you are as a talent evaluator. And there's no team in the entire league that drafted a player that they knew more about than the Steelers with Pickett, so that in itself is very comforting,
Absolutely. Yeah. Area scouts, even more so now because of how much tape and how much information is available for the decision makers. Area scouts are as much private detectives as they've ever been. And it's always been a big part of it.
It used to be the only way to watch the tape was to go into the buildings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Scouts have to go watch the tape, and you can't even take it out. You got to watch it there, and you make a report and you come back. Yeah.
You ask around the room, do we want to watch Auburn or LSU? I'll put LSU in. No, I don't watch Auburn, and put a chew in, spit,
That's fantastic stuff. All right, we're out of time here. There's a bunch of good questions. Apologies if we did not get to yours, but we'll be back with we can maybe filter in some more questions tomorrow. We've got a lot of episodes to go here in the off season as we approach training camp. We've got a ton of more guests here from the network to talk about their specific teams and their specific divisions, some fantasy football war rooms on quarterbacks and wide receiver positions coming into the 2022 season. So a lot to come here as we approach 2022. Thanks for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Make sure for your second listen, you're checking out everything else on the network. Your team is covered. Locked On Dynasty, hosted by my guy Matt Williamson here on the network. Talk to you tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.